Hi guys, we're just waiting for Jason Mowry to join us. He should be on soon, and then we'll split the screen and start talking with him today. So just bear with us. If you guys have any questions for me in the meantime, I could answer them, but Jason will be a lot more interesting than I will be. So we'll wait a bit. Here he is. Perfect. Hey Jason.
Erica, hello.
Hi, it's good to see you.
Good to hear you.
I know,
Um,
I hide.
you're behind the scenes.
I
You're
am.
working the camera.
I may switch it for future videos, so I'm on camera for a moment and then I switch back to the art, but the art's,
Gotcha.
yeah, a bit nicer to look at. So for now, we'll focus here on your two pieces. So we have a couple people watching and we'll answer questions as they come up once we finish conversations that do arise. But I just want to show you guys, these are two pieces by Jason. They are the remaining works that we have at the gallery that were a part of his solo show last year. And so today we'll talk about these works. We'll talk with Jason about the multitude of inspiration and influences behind his career as an artist. He also is a professor. We'll learn more about that too, and wherever our conversation takes us. So Jason, if you don't mind starting with just a bit more about your solo show, the theme behind it, the title, what it represented, and then we'll kind of go into these two pieces in particular.
Sure. Yeah, we trying to remember how many pieces we had, but the solo
You
was
had
in
seven or eight?
November. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think it was around eight, wasn't it? Yeah, 7 or 8. Um, and the title was Amor Fati, um, and the title kind of came to me um, a little later in the process of putting the work together and trying to, um, see not necessarily see what kind of themes kind of coalesced. And the word amor fati means love of fate. Um, I think it was initially um, introduced. Maybe it's a Nietzschean phrase, but I love the the thematic quality of that title, and just kind of how it seemed to be that um, through kind of happenstance that all the works kind of revolved around um, humanity and this kind of inevitability that exists within kind of mythology and many of the themes I was working with the paintings. Um, it's my first solo show, so I was thrilled to be offered and thrilled to be showing it, certainly with Haven. And yeah, so I have fond memories. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but um, in retrospect, it feels like a lifetime ago, even though it was just November. So um,
It does feel quite some time ago, but it also feels like just yesterday we were all having breakfast together and spending
yeah,
time at the gallery. And yeah,
I I still remember those bagels. Those were
yeah,
fantastic.
those bagels make their mark on our visitors. That's why we always insist when we have a lot of you guys in town, let's do that. Because,
Yeah, yeah.
we'll make memories in a multitude of ways, all sensory. So,
Anytime, as long as there's bagels involved. Yeah.
yep. Well, next time they'll be waiting for you too. So, as Jason mentioned, his title really encompasses the work well. His work tends to explore mythologies that we know, as well as his personal stories with inspiration from the world around him. So I think that with these stories, they're meant to teach us lessons, these characters and these narrative motifs, and you put these into your work. And we find that we look to these stories to learn, to not make mistakes, to sometimes be taught how to behave if we aren't coming, to such tenets naturally. And so it really kind of brings that body of work together. And we have mythological titles to each of these pieces too. We have kenosis here, and we have Moloch here. So can you give us a bit more information on what these titles mean and how you decided to visually interpret them?
Sure. Yeah. The one on the left, at least my left, kenosis.
Kenosis. Okay, cool.
The
Sorry, I'm
the term or the title comes from theology, and it's the idea of self emptying, and I thought it this piece in particular I think is one of my more certainly in the show and maybe in my body of work so far is the more it has more spiritual and religious themes than some of my other subjects, and I kind of wanted to explore that, and kind of having the opportunity to explore that with this piece was exciting. And the figure in the piece is kind of at an age where, and I'm certainly it's semi-biographical, autobiographical in a way. I want the figure to be at an age when maybe they were exploring ideas of faith and how that affects one on life's journey. And you see in the background there's a path leading off in the distance, and there's a kind of checker pattern in the foreground that is kind of a reference to symbolic reference to the strategic and the journey in general when we're talking broadly. And the figure is really, again, the figure is kind of like of an age when I was kind of contemplating some of these themes of faith and religion, and there's a kind of look of reflective kind of vulnerability in the character that I was trying to achieve, and you have this kind of angelic being off to the left whispering something in the figure's ear. So you have this kind of literal manifestation of a religious figure, something like an angel speaking, and then you have the symbolic egg in his lap, which I kind of took as again an emptying. It's an empty vessel. The egg is the shell, and the value is what's inside, but this shell is empty. And I kind of wanted to, create a space within the painting that, you're not really sure. It's more of a point of a reflection than a overt message. So it's something, dealing with both reflection and at the same time a kind of a reflection of loss, and in almost a coming of age sort of way, and it's all wrapped up in the in a lot of the little cues and little bits of imagery I've chosen to include.
I think so, and I think that it even goes beyond that. I mean, when you're at this age, this is when you're confronted with decisions about your identity, where you can now explore, is this for me? Is that for me? Let me try this and let me try that, and let me see who I truly am. And you do that by going through those experiences and life choices. But it's still something as adults that we go through, and beyond religion, with our careers, with our relationships, with our everyday decisions. And so I do like that there's a bit of ambiguity here, because it certainly allows for us to kind of project our own stories and our own tribulations and questions and decisions that we make on a daily basis. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I do very much like your choice to hang this angelic figure upside down and have him whispering to him, because for me, he almost had a bit more, or she, I'm not sure the gender of the angel figure, but there was a little bit of a demonic feel for me in my interpretation of the work,
Mm,
where there was something being whispered, and it almost, for me, and this is all my personal opinion and interpretation. This was just kind of the idea also that, we're constantly being faced with these choices, and we have the good and then we have the bad, and it's who we are and how we develop as people and evolve based off of what we decide to go with. So I also very much felt a feel of, like moral dilemma, and I guess sense of good versus evil as well.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think the idea of vessels is a reoccurring, uh, at least concept in how I don't know, perceive my work in general, and within the work itself, and with any kind of, maybe even within symbolic work. I think there's a kind of idea that, as an artist, you are a vessel for the work. You're a vessel for the ideas that you inhabit, that inhabit you, that possess you, and then make their way, find their way onto the canvas or the paper. And so, in some ways, it's like you know, you you fill the vessel, and then you tip it out, and that then is the work, and the the audience, the person who chooses to live with the work, hopefully can connect with that experience. And
I think so. And I believe that they do. I mean, you're creating very personal work, but it's also very universal because it ties in so much. It's not just about you, but it's about your experiences and your knowledge and your inspiration. And so it may be open to a bit more interpretation, but at the same time, it is one of the many aspects that make art wonderful, where people are deriving and responding to it in a multitude of ways and teaching themselves and each other all that, they have to offer and growing.
yeah, and if a work can be something that you can reflect on, in some senses, it exists in your home. It's something. It's not merely wallpaper. It exists as like a connection point between maybe something a little more profound, and it may be something that you live with, and then one day you're passing it, and it something jumps out to you, and that's my hope. And I think that's what I really strive to put, really load the images with personal significance and collective significance.
I think you do. I think that because your work is narrative and you have characters and you have story, it commands that and it changes with the viewer as they change. And I think that you have that human element too, as every artist does, where although the works are immaculate, you still can see some evidence of the fact that a human being was behind this piece and there is medium on this, in this case, this paper. And so it's just this continually connective force between the fact that here, this is evident, someone made it, but here, these are also their ideas and their beliefs and their experiences that now I'm connecting with and I'm growing with as the work grows with me. So I think that happens all the time. And, working amongst artists and having art in my home for so many years, I've truly experienced that. And I've heard from art collectors too that that is the case as well. I don't think that people can buy art if they don't think that they can live with it for the rest of their lives, because it is
Yeah,
an expenditure that is costly. And this is something that you're not going to switch out like a couch. And so you have to be quite certain that this is something that will forever be a part of you, and, lovingly so.
yeah, yeah, and um, yeah. To your point of I do appreciate. I think that's why I like watercolor, because you can get a sense of hand in it. In you'll know if you get real close to some of my pieces, you'll notice there's little bits. You'll even see a little bit of graphite from the original drawing, if you look really closely, and oftentimes it's kind of buried under the watercolor and the gouache. But I like that. I don't want to be so close to photo reference that it feels mechanical in some way. I want the I do want that kind of authorship in some way, that sort of connection to something that's was produced by hand. So
I think so. I think that it allows you to have your personal stamp and control. And that's another very human element to, your work as well as other artists where, these are all your decisions, what you're layering with, what you're working with. And as someone asked just before, these are gouache and watercolor, but they do have the graphite underneath, as Jason mentioned. But I mean, everything is a decision here. It's a decision to compositionally lay it out in such a way and work with this palette and bring these characters in and have this little bit of what feels like stardust to me emerging out of that egg to give it more of a story. And these are all personal decisions that, you think about long and hard, and you come to the conclusion as you've worked on this piece, as well as your others for this collection, that this is how the story, is going to be told for you. And then, of course, leaving it open for the viewer.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And I think, you mentioned before, you have this kind of like stone walkway and it kind of fades off into the distance and it has this almost atmospheric mystery. And I think that further lends itself to this story because when you're that young, the world is the great unknown. There's so much that you don't know about. And so there's much mystery to immerse yourself in. And so I think that it all balances itself out so beautifully. You can tell how much thought you put into everything in this piece.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I think some of the background, even the sand obscuring some of the the tile work, was important to layer in there, and it was, there is always, whenever you're putting together a show, I think it's, well, I mean, for me at least in this show, it was important that I push farther into deeper subject matter than I'd perhaps tackled in the past, and this was probably one of the pieces I sat with for a while, and really thought and kind of reflected on whether or not what direction it should go, and whether I was being whether the message was, I didn't want, I never want a piece to feel too preachy or too over the head. But again, treading that line is delicate. And I still love the piece, and I think it was, I'm glad it had a good wall to hang on for the show. So.
And it has still, both the pieces actually have been hung at the gallery, but of course I brought them home for us to do this today so people can revisit them and learn a bit more about what you have to say behind them. But I do wonder then, do you find that it's a bit difficult to maintain that balance where you are kind of digging quite deep personally and you're trying to flesh out these, very intimate concepts and memories of your past perhaps, versus those where you might take a bit more of an aesthetic or, a more, I don't want to say accessible, but just more
Sure.
or less, involved piece. Because I do sometimes see pieces that are focused more on, perhaps beauty and composition, but at the same time, I do find that they have layers to them. But this one is quite deep-seated with, a lot. And you've, continued to explore that for us today.
Yeah. That's a good observation, and I've certainly made that observation in my own work. There is, at least when thinking about the show, it's kind of like, what do I want to, like, there's a question that leads the way in some sense, and that's kind of like, what do I hope to gain by creating this body of work? What do I hope to, what are my intentions? What are, going forward, and why create, so in some instances, yes, like I do make those efforts towards finding beauty and finding mystery, and then sometimes it's about within the collection, I want to be able to take a few risks and explore some deeper themes. And this was certainly, some pieces. I think as artists, it's kind of like you can play in the shallows or swim in the deep end, and for me, it's important that I want to be in the deep end as much as I can, and sometimes you get you get to the point where you feel like you've gone under, but that can also be exciting. And within a body of work, I think it's like I kind of want to. I think it's if I can get into that deep end and stay there long enough, it's exciting to see what comes out after. So, finding yourself in those places that then lead to other places is exciting, and I think that's kind of the, I don't know, maybe my holistic kind of approach to work and to making art.
I think so. And, at the end of the day, these images are being shared with thousands, hundreds upon thousands of people because of social media and the technological advances that we have beyond just the brick and mortar space of the gallery. And so I think that although you may go quite deep in some and maybe, a little more shallow in others in the sense of, diving to the deep end using water, because with the words, I don't want to have anything misunderstood. It's great because some people are going to be there with you in that deep end, and they will truly connect and understand and feel at ease that there are other people contemplating these thoughts and have had these experiences, whereas others, in other senses, perhaps they're not there at that time and they'll be there in the future, and so they take solace and comfort into works that maybe are a bit less complex in their
Sure. Yeah.
theological and layered significance. And so I think that with art, though, either way, whether you're looking at this piece for, all the thought and the research you put into it, or you're looking at it just because you appreciate the imagery, it's something that connects people regardless because of the way that you work with your medium and your stylization of your human forms and the stories you tell. I think that visually they're so engaging just from an aesthetic standpoint that if someone is not quite there yet, cognitively to jump in behind that meaning, that's okay too, because they will find their own connections and appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's kind of, I take a lot of inspiration from the simplest artists, and certainly Art Nouveau and a lot of the the simplest movement. There was a sense of aesthetics. There was a sense of there was that sense of real care put into the narrative and building it as as a kind of cipher for these emotional states and themes like theology and belief systems. So it's kind of like, in a lot of ways, it's like, it's a risk, but it's like, it's also, it has its, it has its footing, in that kind of last century art. So
I can see that. And I think that, all artists should look to the past for some level of guidance and direction into where they should be going. But of course, always ingraining all your personal experiences and beliefs and ideas and what you value and what you find is beautiful too.
sure. Yeah.
So let's move on to Molech now. Tell us a bit more about this particular piece and the title, what it represents to you, and so on.
Sure. Yeah. Moloch is I'm trying to remember the mythology that Moloch came out. I think it was either Mesopotamian or oh, I can't recall now, but it's a bull deity that folks were, it was kind of like a god that demanded sacrifice of some sort, and it was kind of it's certainly kind of I think the painting's it feels like a fantasy painting in some ways for me. It's kind of like except a kind of a little gorier fantasy. And you have these two figures, one of which is not. You just see the hands, and one of which is not visible, but they're kind of cowering below this headdress, this Moloch headdress, and so it feels it kind of feels like this story that may have been that again is this kind of coalescing of meanings, and hopefully it kind of channels more of a mood that I was going for, and I liked that kind of tension between themes where you have certainly these kind of this kind of innocent figure, and you have this kind of the grim reality of this giant bull headdress, and the candle wax or paint dripping down the front of it. It kind of feels like a narrative you inhabit, and to some extent, and it's it's again, I think it's one of those concepts that it existed within the body of work, and I thought it felt right within the whole body, and it felt right in some of the places I went with some of the work, and so it was a fun painting to inhabit for the time I had it. So it kind of has that quality of like a bad dream. That's again, that's kind of exciting to me.
I think that it also, similar to kenosis, it is open to a multitude of interpretations. Once again, if you don't know anything about the title, or you do, but you don't choose to look it up, I think so much can take your imagination to new places. I mean, as you mentioned, you have two sets of hands. There's one evident person, but there's another set of hands coming out from beneath, and you have this headdress, but the headdress also can signify so much. It may not represent this god, but perhaps it could be the weight of something too. And there's just so much, I think, to pull out of your imagery. And I think that because you balance, stories of, fantastical backings with mythological and sometimes religious characters too, I think really allow you to explore these themes and these ideas in new ways, and work with the strengths that you find from each, story, from each, place, and intermingle them in a way that opens up interpretation for so many people. And I think that, again, with art, it's an incredibly important trait to have.
Yeah, well, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and it's again, it's one of those instances of I want to, not everything will always be pretty. I think it's worthwhile to reflect on that kind of tension between, something that's kind of, the more, it is a little darker in tone.
It has that mood, like you said. I think that was a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, and it's kind of like that mood is has like a kind of powerful intention behind it. Like if when, at least for me, when I was trying to, and you really, I think with all my paintings, I really try to pull in as much sensory information as I can, so the skin feels like it's got sheen to it, and I like to make sure that there's always like this kind of sense of the characters are always like hands, and giving everything a kind of tactile quality that you can imagine the figure's hands on the the skin, or the sense of touch,
Even
is
here, I mean,
important.
the gesture of the fingers are very involved. There's a lot of thought, I think, evident in what he's doing with his hands.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think it's like maybe the sign of the cross for Catholics. So the
Ah.
touching of the thumb and middle finger, I believe. So
Oh, oh, yeah. I don't know anything about that. Sorry.
yeah,
That's,
I'm trying to
yeah.
recall now, but yeah. Um, so yeah, but I think in both paintings, yeah, like hands are something about hands is important
I
in the
think
work. And
in a lot of your works, I've noticed the hands being, although they're never at the front of the piece, they always play a very significant role and they're always quite noticeable in some way.
yeah, I love. I think in college, I just, got into the work of Egon Schiele, and of course he's legendary for his hands and the way he depicted hands in his paintings. And it's just a reminder, seeing his work, that no element of our physicality is without gesture, or is I don't want to leave anything out in terms of how I'm presenting the figure. I don't want to shy away. There's always potential, even in the fingers. Um,
I think so. I think that every body part aids to the story and to the emotion. And so to not utilize a particular part is almost losing a part of your ability to tell that story in a stronger way.
mhm.
I agree. And so your medium of choice is watercolor and gouache. Tell us why you chose that medium to work with and if you've explored others in the past.
Yeah, I think watercolor and gouache came. I've drifted away from it at times and come back to it several times. Early in my, as a kid, I looked up to, um, oh gosh, Alan Lee and like John Howe. Like I mean, there's certainly, like, I used to get the Tolkien calendars that had all this like beautiful artwork in it when I was a kid. Um, and those would hang on my wall. And I think over the years, like, you start to like how they start to ask questions of the paintings. It's like how they do that, what they work with. And I think Alan Lee, John Howe, like, those were some of my early influences. And guys like uh, Charles Vess, from comics. That was kind of early on. And so I started working. I kind of gravitated towards watercolor, just as a following your art heroes in some sense. And then I got to college and I took color theory for 4 years, and we had a color teacher who we did all our color theory exercises in gouache. So I kind of learned to paint in gouache, which is kind of opaque watercolor. And I think there's so many phenomenal gouache artists in the kind of, I think of artists like Adolphe Menzel and certainly contemporary people like James Gurney. I know uses gouache a lot. And I believe Shealy did too. And so it's kind of and I think I just love the kind of earthy quality of gouache and watercolor together. I think when you get up close to the paintings, and one of the reasons I it's cool seeing them in person is they have this kind of like earthiness that doesn't quite, it's hard to translate whenever you post it, or it goes online. But in person, it's kind of got like a rich matteness, and I think, as opposed to oil paints, which have kind of a sheen to them, I like that. Something about that earthiness seems real to me. Yeah. So
Yeah, I think that explains it really well. And it does hold true to your work. And I think too, your palettes too, they go hand in hand very well.
thank you. Yeah, I think, yeah, I kind of try to uh, cross the palette as much as I can, like in a kind of split complement sort of uh, fashion. And then sometimes it's always, I trust at some point in my career as a, and effort as a painter, it's you just kind of need to trust your instincts in a way.
I think so. Not overthink things too much. Go with what feels right.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of that in there too. Like after you get so far down the road, it's you feel like, well, I know I have this kind of education I've have passed through in some ways. So it's like I can just, I can make decisions, and they don't they're more intuitive, they're more instinctive, because I have kind of faith in the work I've put in up to this point. So um, that's kind of been a long process,
And
but
it will be an internal process, I'm sure.
yeah, I think everyone you know gets to those points, where every artist has doubts, and sometimes if you don't, it's hard to you know um, overconfidence is can be a trap as well. But
Absolutely. It's hard.
um,
It's a struggle with emotions when a lot of you are some of the most sensitive and emotional people out there because you're taking so much in and you're releasing so much at the same time. But it's like with everything, it's balance. And,
mhm.
when you find that right, momentum between all that you're trying to harness and release, I think that's when you find that point where the work kind of starts to unravel itself naturally. And again, without too much overthinking, because that always seems
Yeah,
to be the nail in the coffin, for sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. There is that kind of, I do. Uh, I don't know if there's kind of like a Midwest sort of, and I've a group of artists locally that I appreciate, and they're we all kind of have like this, the kind of quality we've talked about with this kind of like, I don't know, blue collar, put work in, you're putting in work in some sense, and it's like, there is kind of that element, that it's I don't feel like it's worthy of the wall, unless it's I put in the requisite work up front. But yeah, it's a
it's a brave thing for you guys. You have to have courage to finally walk away from a piece and put it out there into the world, as it's subject to so many people and opinions. And it's something that, as an artist, I'm sure you guys with social media especially think about all the time because a new comment pops up, a new follower pops up, and here they are taking in these images and these stories behind them. And
yeah,
they're, an amalgamation of so much experience and thought and time and decision that, each piece is just one part of you. And so I always admire you for, putting out such personal stories. These are not abstract thoughts. These are very concrete ideas and personal narratives. So
well, I
it's
appreciate
something,
that. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, and it's so wonderful that so many people do connect and you're filling something for people that, they didn't know they were missing. And I think that's a very beautiful thing, but it's still extremely tough. And as you evolve as an artist and as a person, you're always going to look back upon your work and perhaps think, oh, maybe I could have done that differently. But each piece has its purpose to kind of bring you to that next advancement in technique and in thought. And
hmm
so I think that if you do, as you mentioned, kind of put all that into that piece before you release it, as much as you may have that in the future, or you may have already had it now as an artist, I still think you'll still be able to see that this was, the best work and still be pretty pleased with it.
Yeah, and there's a kind of there's a give and take. It's not it's not well it is rewarding. There's an incredible amount of freedom at the end of it, and I when it comes to finishing a work, and it feels like you've passed through something in terms of a it is that kind of journey of self exploration in a way that is happening in the paint, and I think people can connect with that. And yeah, it is getting to your point of social media and Instagram and things like that. That's an interesting question. I think about that a lot, and I certainly have students and try to give advice and guidance when I can. And for me, it's always I post work, when I'm farther down the road. So if you see posts from me, I'm usually beyond where I'm posting. So you might see a sketch I'll post or something to that effect, and I've actually started the painting. So I kind of hedge my bets, and I don't want influence from that sphere to affect my decisions in
I
any
think
way.
that's very smart.
So yeah, it's kind of like I usually I'll post something. Not when it's happening. It's not unless I'm doing, like I'll do little live drawings or things like that. But
I think social media has too much of an impact on artists and on creatives where you
yeah,
get so much instant feedback, both good and bad, but the quality of the person behind that feedback is anonymous. And that's a major problem because you could be getting feedback from somebody who knows nothing about art, technique, and they can be quite young or just completely new to this world. And
mm-hmm.
you have no idea. And as sensitive people, you're now taking these opinions and these, thoughts so much to heart, and it alters your natural path and it leads to
Mm-hmm.
overthinking. And I think, starting to change the way you're creating art. Why are you creating art? Are you creating art for yourself? Are you creating art to connect people? And so now your direction is getting shifted a bit, again, based off of the opinion of somebody who probably doesn't matter. And even if they did matter, even if they were one collector of yours, at the end of the day, it's just one person when you have a sea of so many supporters and invisible supporters too, that this can't be what, you know, and of course it's sometimes inevitable, but it can't be what changes your mood and changes your direction as an artist because
Mm-hmm.
it's, again, there's not much quality behind those typically who are saying so.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those things where you don't want to let the tail wag the dog, um,
Yeah.
in some sense. So it's I would rather again base my direction, or my intentions on what to paint next, have that come from again a more internal place than from influence from, I mean, any sphere.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. The paradigms changed when you did not have social media. It was only when you went to your gallery openings or you spent some time at the gallery or at some physical showing where you would
Yeah.
kind of get that feedback in person and maybe, indirectly from your gallerist or somebody that you are working with on a freelance commercial project. But now here you are. You decide when you're putting that imagery out there, and now you're receiving all the comments. And so it's a
Yeah.
very different world. And it's one that is still quite murky and quite Wild West like for
Hmm.
everyone to navigate. And
Yeah.
so there's no, not that people really practice good ethics and, consideration all the time anyway, but certainly I think with social media where there's no ramifications to you saying something terrible or not, in the best light that you feel you're going to get punished. So at the end of the day, people are a bit more bolder and braver and there's no etiquette, unfortunately, and that could be very damaging to artists. And it's quite sad that people don't always realize and understand the gravity of I'm not sorry the gravity of what it is that they've done.
Sure. Yeah.
And so your tactic, I think, is excellent and something I think and I hope that more artists, are doing too.
Yeah, and I can still remember when I think I hung work, one of my first shows in like a little coffee shop, in a you know small town, and was kind of pre any kind of social media, and it's I remember there's a freedom in that too, that it was kind of, I just remember sitting in the shop, and there was a kind of opening, there's a little band and stuff like that, and it was fun to be kind of fly on the wall and get that kind of unfiltered feedback, and not have like a kind of identity. Like me as the artist, I wasn't relevant in that space. It was just the work, and I think that's what's exciting to me still about galleries and showing in galleries, and obviously I'm there when I can be, and it's great to be connecting with new people and talking about the work, but it's also still a joy to be kind of that fly on the wall.
Absolutely. And when you think about the audience too, when you have the audience at these exhibitions, at these events, they're there for the arts. And so they have a natural inclination and interest in them. And now with social media, it's wonderful because you're hitting people from all over with different interests that maybe weren't looking to see your art or didn't care about art before, but here you created an image that is so poignant for them that now they're completely sucked in and they want to see more and they want to buy prints or an original one day. And so it's quite a beautiful thing too, but
Yeah.
like anything new, it's just going to take time for, proper social practices and etiquette to come into play. But like anything, it's a tool, and there's a lot to be gained if it can be managed emotionally, because
Yeah.
what you're doing is very emotional. And so it's a constant battle, I'm sure, to kind of balance the two.
Yeah. There's the downside certainly of social media, and there's also the again, to your point, the kind of reach you have. I'm kind of operating modestly, in a, here in Columbus, Ohio, and it's kind of like I sell work to, connect with people in Australia out of social media, out of Tokyo and in Germany, and that blows my mind sometimes, and the kind
It's
of
beautiful.
the kind of that someone across the world can have a connection with something that is literally a little bit bigger than a thumbstand, so that makes me excited. That gets me up in the morning. The kind of idea that you can embed something of yourself, something of a connectiveness with the human experience into a work, and then send it, transmit it via the interwebs out into the world,
And it transcends. It reaches people with different backgrounds,
yeah,
different
that's a good
geographical
word.
locations. I mean, it's one of the most incredible things in the world. You don't know when you wake up who has found your work and has connected with it so strongly. And even
Yeah,
if it's just from an emotional point and they can't acquire the work, it's still something that every artist, I think, in their entirety of their heart want to do. I mean, you're connecting people and you're, sharing things and learning, and it's a very, very beautiful thing. And we are quite fortunate to have that level of reach because of technology, and
yeah.
it's done wonderful things for galleries and for artists and for the arts in general.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And so that kind of brings me to wondering a bit more about your role as a professor and what it is that you teach, and how you feel that your teaching and kind of shifting the focus a bit maybe more on technical aspects has affected your work. And yeah, I think that's my question so far. I think I have more, but we'll take
well,
it
if it
from
comes
there.
to we'll go from there. Yeah, I teach I'm a graduate of Columbus College of Art and Design, and I teach there now. I've been teaching for at the school for about 5 years, and I teach a class, and it's a phenomenal class. I'm really just stupid fortunate to be given to have the opportunity to teach it. But it's within the animation department, and the class is kind of geared for animators and illustrators, and it's I like to call it like an immersive life drawing experience. We in the tradition of Walt Disney, we bring animals into the classroom, and we take the students kind of out of the studio as well and into kind of the community at large, and we draw from life as much as we possibly can. And it's a 6-hour class. It's like every Friday, and it is it's there's this great quote by Walt Stanchfield that I tell all the students at the beginning of the semester. It's that everyone's got 10,000 bad drawings in them, and the sooner they get them out, the better. So we kind of build the class around that idea of showing up and drawing a lot. And within a semester, the average student will pass through, will create roughly 2,500 drawings.
Wow.
And by the end of the semester, we sit down and they bring in this giant stack of, it's a big stack of drawings, and we go through them all. And but we have, like I said, we bring animals into the classroom, and Charlotte Belland, who is the chair of the department and kind of created, asked me to teach and kind of, presented the vision in a way. So, we have, and through some of her connections, she's connected with the Columbus Zoo. So we have the zoo they'll bring a cheetah into the classroom once a semester.
Wow. That's really unique. I haven't heard about that.
Yeah. If you scroll through some of my Instagrams, you'll probably find something, but I think there's a cheetah on there somewhere.
I think I've seen an owl too at one point.
Yeah, we've partnered with the Ohio School of Falconry, and they'll really bring in. They have owls and they have falcons, and I get to play falconer like once a semester, which is just surreal.
It's awesome, and I'm sure a large inspiration for feathers being an active part of your work too.
Exactly. Yeah, I get a lot of great reference just every Friday. So.
Do you find that your students, because of the accessibility of technology and ready-made images, lean more towards just internet surfing for material, and that the class now shifts them a bit towards working from real-life reference?
Yeah, I think that's always something we try and talk about, and even it's a traditional class, so in that we use like traditional media. We move through. Pencil, brush pen, charcoal during the course of the semester, and really push drawing. And I think, there is this kind of why would I draw from life? I can just draw something off my phone, and it is I do try to really push or hammer home the fact that we want to. We want to confront, our eye with a three-dimensional object. If you really want to study something, you really want to figure it out, drawing it, again, having that connection in some sense. Like we draw figure skaters once a semester, usually in the fall, obviously, and it's at like an indoor ice skating rink, and that you have with, it's an ice rink. It's cold. I'm drawing, but you go back and you look at these drawings, and they have that sort of, it's a memory in some sense bottled up in this rough little observational sketch, and that's once you really get into that, and it usually takes a number of weeks before students kind of start. Digging the sensory component, because you're a lot of times you're out of the studio, we're in the world, and we're drawing. Sometimes it's hot out, sometimes it's cold or whatever, and but you have that. It's kind of like it's kind of a memory,
It is, and
it's wrapped up in the drawing. So
it influences so many aspects like the lighting and the color, and these are things that would evoke the mood too in some senses depending on that temperature and the story that that artist is telling. And oftentimes if imagery is just piecemeal, brought from sources that are not from reality, you forget those elements, and those elements are what I think tells a story even more and creates a piece that's even more understandable and relatable.
yeah, yeah. I think I've certainly taken a lot of video and done a lot of drawings. And what's cool is I get to draw with the students as well, and that's kind of a perk
Yeah,
of being a teacher. Is like so I get to draw every Friday, and take reference and things like that, and bring it back to the studio. And a lot of it's found its way into my work. We connect with the group out of Ohio, Ironwood Wolves, that they bring wolves into the classroom. They have a couple foxes, ambassador foxes, that they bring into the classroom, and students can draw wolves and foxes, and yeah, it's a
that's
good time.
incredible.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And reconnecting people with nature too, which I think your work does a lot of on its own as well.
thank you. Yeah, I think yeah, it's yeah. Again, if you're like, how does for me it's like, how does and it's all quick gesture sketch, but it's kind of like there's something that you embed in the drawing when you are confronted with something physical like a wolf or a cheetah, and I'm trying to encourage that in the students, and having it. What is it? It's not that there's anatomy you can teach. There's structure you can teach. There's form and fur blocks and things like that. And but there's also something about being in the same room with some of these animals that.
And that tangibility. And
Mhm.
I think the individuality of that animal and the emotion. And I think that comes through in your work very well. I think that the animals have that sense of, I'm a unique individual and I have, these emotions. And I don't know. I think that I've always kind of felt connected to your work for many reasons, but the way that you've always depicted animals has stuck out to me. And I think it is because of, that in-person opportunity you have regularly with them.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you know, I I do. See, I think I layer the images and the work in a way that the animals are you know um, stand-ins for kind of aspects of our humanity, or personas of a sort that
I think
you know
so.
is interesting. And it's like we always um, apply those then to the animals in some sense, and there's this kind of interesting real this kind of symbolic connection that I don't know. It's like in it when it's there in a painting. It's I don't know if it exists any other place than in a painting in some sense, where you get that kind of give and take, that language of the two,
It's a unique
the interaction.
interpretation and
Hmm.
depiction. I agree. So we have 30 seconds left. Instagram has provided a timer.
Okay.
So do you want to come back on or do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, we can come back if
Yeah,
yeah, if you feel like, yeah.
let me close this off. We'll talk a bit more and we'll
Sure.
address any questions that may come up too. So just join me again in a moment. I'll be back. Thank you guys.
Perfect.
Tune in again. Okay, we're back. Hi again.
Hello, everyone.
And thank you everyone for coming back and joining us as we start to conclude our talk. And again, please send your questions over as we'd love to hear from you all. And so continuing with teaching and how it's impacted your work, has it changed at all? And if so, in what ways since you began teaching as well as creating your personal body?
Um, and I don't have, quite the teaching resume that I'm sure a lot of the artists do, but, um, you know, I, I, I think for me, it's, um, part of teaching has been about, obviously connecting with students and you're sharing in this kind of, I had great teachers. They instilled in me this kind of this love of craft and of art and you know being part of that, being able to contribute to that is humbling, and so I you know take it with you know take it seriously in some sense, and um, want to be able to I think that kind of also circles back to not just like the technical aspects of the art, but also the um, um, just being it gives you pause, and you realize you're part of this kind of the art identity in some sense, and um, yeah, how you kind of pass that along. Um,
And I'm sure it teaches you plenty about yourself too, and it forces
mm,
you to see your art as well as, the world around you in very different ways.
yeah, and I certainly remember being a student and being able to again, like, um, help in whatever way I can, guide these students through some of this, and not just um, oftentimes it's we rely on the technical, but there are these moments of you get to connect with them one on one, and
Yeah,
you know give them the kind of heads up on um, the type of career they've chosen, and where some of the pitfalls and um, some of the glories that involves. So that's a cool thing, and
absolutely.
it kind
I
of
think,
grounds you in your profession too, which is good.
yeah, it gives you other insight that you might not have had before. And I think that I can speak for most people that in their educational careers, they found that there was always that one or two or maybe more professors that had that passion and that flair for sharing something that they loved, but in an academic manner. And that just kind of helped those students find what it was that they best connected with and what they pursued career paths in. And I had that with art history, where I had one professor that made me shift from a studio art major to art history because up until him, all my professors were a bit, you know, I don't know, like automaton like with the information they were dispelling.
Yeah.
There wasn't a love that was apparent with the way that they spoke and they shared the work that they were teaching all of us. And they were great teachers, but they lacked that passion and that fire. And that one professor, he was what I needed to bring me over to studying art from a more
Mm.
academic perspective, which I'm very grateful for, as it's led me to be where I am now. So I think that, having that passion, but also, as you said, that real life hands-on experience is so important because as artists, you're not just, if you choose to pursue a fine art path or a commercial path, there's so much still that you need to know that goes beyond technique, and it's that real life application. And so it's always so wonderful to hear that our artists are also teaching because they're bringing in a very important perspective that many artists who also teach may lack if they're not actively exhibiting or doing commercial work or doing other professions outside of just teaching. And so I think that's great. I always say that I want to do some kind of workshop where, as a gallerist, me and perhaps others can sit there and explain from the, the fine art commercial side of working with galleries, what you need to consider with photography, with framing, with archival materials, with shipping, with social media. There's so many things that unfortunately curriculums can't fit in because
Yeah.
you're only so limited in time. And these are things that, only are learned, by making mistakes in many cases if there are not peers to consult. And it's just something that I love to see artists like you doing because you can offer that insight and that guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I think, well, what you're, that would be invaluable. And, certainly, um, yeah, like, I think when I started showing and when you first approached me about showing with Haven, I told you at one point I went to, I think it was Beautiful Bazaar posted I'm trying to remember that it's a
Oh,
series that you
yeah,
were
the
part
Ask
of.
a
It was
Gallerist.
um, it was like a PDF. I can't remember. It was like Mentor Me, maybe
Yeah,
that was
Mentor
it,
Me is what it was called, which was,
which
I
was,
thought, fantastic.
yeah, yeah. I found that to be very informative because there's a kind of um, once um, there's a kind of, and I have kind of like, you know, fingers in several pies in some sense, and it's kind of like, it was good to have a sense of what someone with as much experience as you have, kind of compiling that information was very helpful.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just me, for everyone who is not familiar, it was other
Hmm.
gallerists too, all at
Yeah,
different points
quite a
of,
few.
running their businesses and levels of experience, all doing different things. So it was this wonderful, symphony of various voices, all within this genre. So it was
Hmm.
relative to the style of work as Jason's and as what Beautiful Bazaar showcases. But you have different opinions and you can see where they overlap and where you should say, hey, maybe this is, the right way about going about such things. And then also where they might differ and that allow you to kind of explore other paths. And I think that it's incredibly important. And as I, stress to all artists that we work with, so also, if you're working with a gallerist, ask your gallerist. Don't feel bad or embarrassed. We're all learning. I mean, I'm learning new things all the time and trying to make everything better where our artists have it easier, our collectors have it easier, our fans can have it easier following us and supporting us with their comments and interactions too. But if you don't ask, then it's something that represents both you and your gallery. And you're in this together, you're partners, and the gallery should always want to help their artists and be there for them to answer any level of questions. And you grow together, and it's a really beautiful partnership for that reason as well as many others.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, yep, ask your questions always. And Jason, have always been such a pleasure to work with, and you've definitely asked me questions, and you've taken my feedback, which I'm very grateful for.
Yes, yes, and I like I've said in the past, I appreciate your directness and accessibility. I think is like I think that's, as an artist, it's like you look for the gallery's gonna get back to you, in an email or just be accessible. And I certainly have had that experience with Haven and you and Joseph, and just being, um, certainly willing to go the extra mile in
Thank
everything.
you.
So yeah,
We feel it through your work. Every time I see something new that you post, and I get jealous when it's not for us. But I'm happy also to see you working with other galleries and continuing down this creative path. But I'm always like, oh, I love that, and I hear myself saying these things out loud to my computer screen, and it's always so exciting to talk with you and hear from you and see what you're doing because it's just this constant kind of like reinvigoration, of inspiration and of brightness. And it's something that I've been stressing a lot while we go through this unique time because artists role, are critical. You're taking us someplace hopeful and someplace a bit mysterious that, gives us a bit of a break from the harsh reality of the way things are. And I think
mm,
that psychologically and emotionally, we really do need that. And it helps me tremendously. So it's always a wonderful, experience when I get to hear from you guys and see what it is you do.
yeah, this is a cool opportunity to reach people, and I I think. I don't think I've seen anyone else do the live chats. I've seen a few artists kind of spontaneously pop up, do, artist to artist, but I haven't seen too many galleries doing it. So this is cool.
Yeah, I like this. I mean, I think, I've been saying I want to do them even after, the gallery's back open and we can kind of return to all seeing each other because
Mm.
we still have so many collectors and followers and admirers all over the world who won't have the opportunity to come to every show. And so to kind of give them this personal conversation and opportunity to interact with you, I think
Mm.
is awesome because people always, want to hear more about your insight. And as much as I know, it's much more interesting hearing it from you and seeing where the conversation leads.
Cool.
So,
I hope so. Yeah.
yeah, I think so. And so, yeah, and thank you guys for tuning in and, those of you who, constantly follow and are, sending questions and interest towards these videos. We really appreciate them.
Yeah, I
Um,
didn't catch many of the questions, but I'm certainly willing to
we kind of
retroactively answer
Yeah,
them
we
if
can
we
definitely,
didn't
if you
cover
guys
anything.
have anything else you want us to touch on, or if you have things that have, been looming that you want to address, we're happy to do so. There's one question, but I'm not quite sure what they mean. It just says, "What is painter?"
Mm.
I don't know if you're asking about the medium, which is gouache and watercolor, or who. But if you can be a bit more specific, we can definitely, help you answer that question a bit more. But yeah, so I think my questions that I've been thinking about, actually, no, there's one more question. Sorry. This all comes like naturally. I don't have a list of questions, so
Sure.
sometimes they pop up later. But I want to talk more about the influence of the comic world and the fantasy world in respect to your work. Because as I mentioned earlier, you tie that world together with theology and mythology. It's always down to the story, I think, and the characters that are a huge part of that. So, growing up, you mentioned you had an admiration for Tolkien and the artwork associated, comics too. Tell us a bit more about how that evolved into where you are today as an artist.
I think growing up, it was kind of, and of course this is like, pre-internet. We had, and growing up in Columbus, Ohio, you don't have the big museums that you do in the in the big cities, and for me, it was kind of the first um, taste I got of art, and
Mm.
those first impulses were came from things like the comic book store that we was a couple miles from our house. My brother and I would bike to. And then there was it was a video store, so we ended up watching movies, and my brother and I would watch Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel talk about movies, every, I think it was like Sunday on, the one of the local channels, and they talked about film in a way that was incredibly, like they were looking for depth in something like a movie, and as a kid you're maybe that's the first time you've heard an adult talk about like depth in a depth in a visual medium. Um, so that was kind of some of my early um, my early influences in terms of how I kind of developed visually. The comic book stores, the movie theaters, and we did have an art museum, the Columbus Museum of Art, and they had a lot of they have a number of Hopper pieces, Edward Hopper, George Tooker, some of these, they kind of have that, especially Hopper and Tooker, they both have like this kind of a emotional core to some of their pieces, and this kind of they're dealing with certainly symbolic work in Tooker's case, that was, I didn't quite understand it at the time, being when I was younger, and then you go off to college, and you start, again, you take art history, and you start to engage with art in a different way. But I think certainly fantasy art was an early influence, and I had we used to get I had Nintendo Power like when I was a kid, the magazine. Every kid had a Nintendo, and there used to get the magazine that had like these awesome illustrations in it
Yeah.
from Yoshitaka Amano and Katsura Terada and a few others. But that was like I used to cut them out and put them on a wall along with the Tolkien calendars. And
Yeah.
so Amano was like a big, and then, was a big influence early on. And there's still a lot of, his influence I see, tucked into my work. And certainly, you get to a point where you realize what his visual language is and where he's coming from. And, you discover Art Nouveau, and you discover Klimt and, Mucha
Yeah.
and these
You
artists.
just,
And it's
you,
kind of, the world opens up, in some
yeah.
sense. And
You just kind of fall down that rabbit hole and you just find someone else and something else. And it's just an endless wellspring of inspiration.
yeah, yeah,
And
it's the hero behind the hero, and
yeah, it's an incredible journey, and one that, we're fortunate to be able to take over and over again with so many new artists and creatives.
yeah, and it's, I think it wasn't till many years later, I was in my 30s before I read people like Joseph Campbell and Hero's Journey and uh, Hero with a Thousand Masks, and Campbell got me into Jungian ideas and exploring things like the archetype and the hero's journey and the kind of that kind of again that power of myth, and that um, how these stories kind of embed themselves at the kind of core of our collective being in some sense, and
Hmm.
and that's something you can play with as a painter. Like that's something you can connect with and embed in the work in some way. And
Absolutely.
like all bets are off then. It's in terms of what a painting can be. If those are if those ideas are in your tool set in some sense, it's like or in the um, if you're placing those as kind of like a touchdown, something you're connecting with, then it enriches the world in which the painting exists, and that's always exciting for me.
It is. And
Um,
these are ideas and stories and concepts that, have lived on from generation to generation.
mm-hmm.
And they have these core, aspects that are constantly understood and relatable to people. And as artists, one of your many roles is now taking these ideas, continually, enforcing them into, society and into our thoughts, but reinventing it and remixing it in such a way where now it's contemporary and now it's relatable to us. And so we now living, in 2020 can look at these pieces and derive our own interpretations from them. But at the same time, someone perhaps 100 years from now or 100 years back can also come to their own conclusions, and maybe even learn a little bit now about today and who you are as a person. And I think that's really important. And I think that these stories will always be revisited and retold generation after generation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, painting is just one beautiful way of doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, having it as kind of a again like a point of reflection on a wall, that you pass and it has its moment in the body of work, but it's also if you can connect it back to something uh, much older, within a collective story or in which what myth is, and if you can connect it to that, it just it has that, you're talking then about timelessness, and
Absolutely.
that's exciting. So
Yeah, for sure. And so a question popped up. Are you painting more now? Is burnout happening more that you have more time? I'm struggling with balancing and resting versus art.
Did I hear burnout? Was that I missed the middle of that
Oh, sorry.
question?
I'll reread it. Are you
Sure.
painting more now? Is burnout happening more now that you have more time? I'm struggling with balancing and resting versus art.
Yeah. Personally, I've I don't think I have. I mean, everyone's got lives to live, and I think at the end of the day, we've all got a new world in which we're trying to wrap our minds around in some sense. And I know for me, it's I'm juggling suiting up, to go to the grocery store and making sure I don't, you know, uh, contaminate and infect, the people I care about when I'm in their presence, as little as often. But and speaking, and I'm assuming that's what your question's getting at is the quarantine. So it's I in that way it's like that's an anxiety that is we're all collectively kind of working through, and um, I'm of the opinion that you stare at the nasty thing until you feel the underneath it in some sense, and then you figure out how to um, deal with the emotion or the anxiety that comes about as a result of um, kind of not flinching. And certainly art can alleviate that. And for me, it's it's a place to put some of those emotions, and having a place to put some of those emotions is, I think, it's been important for me. It's how I've dealt with things like loss and struggle in the past, and will continue to. I mean, so. There's that. It's kind of like I don't want to. It's not that. There's this kind of either or quality of it. It's like, well, I don't have time for the work in the face of it, and that's okay. Um, there's a time and a place to commit, say 50 hours to a painting, but there's also a reward built into the act of painting that I think is something to be considered. And it's like, if you can't, maybe it's worth reflecting on that, whether or not the process is you've embedded something in the process, you've made the process something that gets you through an emotionally trying time, and you know um, I couldn't imagine doing I couldn't imagine doing things like fan art. I don't know if I could imagine seeing that being like a coping mechanism for, not to poo-poo anyone who likes fan art, but I couldn't imagine that being a coping mechanism for some of the struggles of just the day to day. So yeah, it's worth reflecting on what type of art are you making, and at the very least can it serve to alleviate some of the some of the heaviness. Um,
I think if it has in the past, it certainly will now. And it's just one of the greatest challenges is turning off the outside world and being able to immerse yourself back into these stories and these explorations, and
mm,
also finding a new schedule, because so many of you have, your whole family at home now, which you never had before, and you have other aspects of life vying for your attention where you can't stay as strict to timetables for creating, for instance. And it's a great challenge. And I really admire and respect everyone who's at home with their full families, with the anxieties and stresses of what's going on and the new normal, if you could even call this that, but it's been going on now for enough time, but still finding that time to, create beautiful imagery that, expresses story and hope. And, we need our escapes, and we're not
Hmm.
going to be as healthy as we can be mentally and emotionally if we are not provided that. And we have to provide that for ourselves and make that time. And it's our responsibility because nobody else would do that for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's very good to self-reflect, in all different, times and experiences of life. And yeah, so thank you for asking that. That was good. I think it led
Yeah.
us
Great
someplace,
question.
interesting.
Hmm.
So is there anything else that you want to touch on while we're together?
Um, I think we covered quite a bit.
Yeah.
I can't think of a whole lot, but yeah, I hope, yeah, certainly hope you and Joseph are well, and um,
Thank you. I hope you guys are too. You seem well, still going on the grocery store adventures. And I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it's like, it's really ridiculous when you walk in the grocery store and you see these people with, like, you know, face gear and gloves on. And I'm glad they, of course, they're taking precautions because that's important. We do the same thing. I wear a hood on, and I make the hood really tight so you barely can see my face. And I have the face mask, and it's like an alien world. It's so different. But it's certainly a part of what our lives are now. And, these little, videos and seeing people continually create like you.
my mom
Or,
stitched for me, which
did
is kind
she?
of sweet. Yeah,
Oh, see? I mean, all these really nice things are
yeah,
coming out of it too, which is important to focus on as well.
yeah, yeah, and I think it does it does in a way like reprioritizes what's real in a way, because
Yeah.
I have a nature preserve and a public park. It's a couple miles from me, and I'm out there. I'm typically out there 3 to 4 times a week. I try to get out there and do a hike and connect.
Absolutely.
It's a great way to clear your head, and I encourage. I think one of my art heroes, Amina Robinson, said, when she was asked, how do you make art, and she said, I walk. I
Yeah.
take a walk. And I think that's walking in nature is a you know great way to getting back to that kind of burnout idea. Great way to reset, take a break from the work,
We think so
um,
too. We do the same as you.
and reflect. Really, and it's not like that. It's not like you leave the work at home. It comes with you. But it's a great reset. Having those little moments of reset,
And
and
I think it rewires your brain a
mm-hmm.
bit. So does this situation. You're confronted with new challenges, new ways of living, new emotional, the mountains to climb. And I think that as humans, we need that change. And I'm sorry that the change is this because I would much prefer something else. But at the same time, I think that it, as you said, allows you to kind of change your priorities a little bit and understand things and have experiences in a way that you never would have before.
Yeah, yeah,
And as artists and as human beings, it's essential to our evolution and our personal growth.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I see. Um, yeah, this will be interesting. I think there'll be a lot of um, certainly in its immediacy. It's horrific and uh, challenging, but we'll get through it, and I think yeah, I don't
We
know.
will.
I have
I,
nothing to say.
yeah, no, but you're right. We will. And
Yeah.
you know, it's sad, but hopefully we can find more about ourselves through the process
Mm.
and find new ways to do things and find new ways to care about each other. And there's light always. So yeah, we
Yeah.
will end on that note. Thank you guys all for watching. Thank you, Jason, for taking so much time and giving us
Thank
so
you.
much insight. It's my pleasure. I learned so much too. And, these are conversations that we get to have with you when you come out to the gallery. And so I always think after, like, oh, I wish this could have been shared with people because it's always so good and natural. And you get, that background on you guys and that human element that people unfortunately miss if they can't be at the gallery. So it's wonderful
Yeah.
that we can do this. And I
Yeah.
thank you for sharing all that you have today with us.
Thank you, Erica. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, our pleasure. And so, for everyone still watching and who will watch in the future, these will be up on YouTube on our gallery channel. So, if you've missed anything or if you want to rewatch, that you're welcome to join us there. And these are the two pieces that we currently have available from Jason. You can always inquire about them. And we have more work on the way from Jason in the future, too. So, we look forward to doing this with you again with him in the future when he has his show next year. And also just having more work from him. So, thank you all again. Thank you, Jason. And
Thank you, Erica.
yeah, I wish you guys all take care and we'll see you all soon.
We'll see you.
Bye.